Yes, so California has agreed reparations, and so I have decided as of today I shall be identifying as a Californian black man. So I'd like to greet you with a fresh what's up and a boyashka, as I believe that's
May I have my pass, please?
that's the way it's done.
If you are as such, then you will hand me a pass to prove it.
There you go. You have a pass for the duration of this segment. So yes, California. For those of you who don't know, California is a failed state on America's west coast. They used to be fairly famous for making movies and growing oranges, but these days it has descended into a socialist hellhole that produces sadness, profits for U-Haul, and internet censorship. Speaking of internet censorship, we have been demonetized, so I encourage you to go over to the website and sign up at lotuseaters.com, where you'll find lots of fascinating premium content such as this one, Brokenomics number 20, which is looking at universal basic income, which is an idea not terribly dissimilar to the sort of handout that we're going to be talking about today. So, yes, have you ever been to California, Harry?
I've never been to America.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. I went to California once.
How was it?
I was surprised.
Was it pre or post homeless camps on every corner?
I don't know if there's ever not been such a thing in California.
Oh, right.
I went a long time ago, sort of back in sort of early 2000 or something, and saw Britney Spears.
Was it still a
walking
red
down the
state
street
at that
and,
point?
Was it?
Was it still a red state then?
No, it'd gone.
I mean, they did have a Republican governor for a while, but that was Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes,
so.
Yes, they did, didn't they? But I think
and for a long time it was a red state, as far as I'm
for a
aware.
while,
And then it flipped, and now it is deep
60s
blue.
or 70s. Oh, Reagan was from there, wasn't he? So he probably would have influenced it quite a bit. But no, it has descended quite a bit since those days. And with this latest budget proposal, well, actually, let's talk about the budget of California, because the budget of California runs at about $300 billion a year, and this proposal to give reparations would cost $600 billion. So possibly not affordable. And in addition to that,
I'm sure all those Hollywood moguls are happy to see their taxes double for the privilege of ending racism.
Funny you should mention that, because a lot of them are leaving. Let's have a look at this chart. So
really?
This is This is net domestic migration in the United States, and as you can see, people are going into Florida, Texas, and some other sort of sensible places, and they're fleeing out of California and New York.
I will just make this argument very quickly, which is, in all likelihood, fleeing to these much better places and immediately ruining them by changing the voting demographics of these places. Texas, for instance, has a number of Democratic strongholds in the major cities there, like Austin, which is a very deep blue city. As far as I'm aware.
All cities are basically blue at this point, aren't they, in the US?
In the US, as far as I'm aware.
Probably Europe as well.
What would you say, actually, seeing as you say you've been to California, what would you say, because I've heard that the difference in California, like many places, is that the LA, San Francisco, all of these places, deep blue hellholes, but the countryside is very red. Did you experience that?
Well, I didn't spend that long, because basically I went to LA.
And then you thought, I need to get out of here as quickly as possible.
Yes, I was so appalled I then promptly went off to Vegas.
Oh, okay.
And spent the rest of my time there, which was much better. Well, actually, no, it was incredibly tacky, but I quite liked it. Yes, but no. So, what has this task force in the US done? And this task force, which is recommending these reparations, they're not some joke committee. They're not, some organisation that's sort of been self-appointed. This is appointed under the auspices of the Secretary of State, Department of Justice. So it's a guy called Rob Bonita. So he's the sort of Justice Secretary for California, and he's appointed it. We can have a look at the committee now. So there we go. So there's the sort of official website of it. And if we scroll down, we see the task force members who have decided that black people should get a 1.2 million. Now,
I thought you said this wasn't a joke committee. I mean, to be fair, most committees are.
I don't know what the first thing that leaps out at you about this committee, but the first thing that I notice is they're all Californians. So
that's a problem to start off with.
So possibly they have some incentive to come down on this view. But they've published a report. So they were basically commissioned to go and look at the horrors of slavery and other forms of oppression that have kept their people down, and then they have decided to award a monetary number against that they feel is appropriate, and there's lots of factors that go into it, but it basically comes up to about 1.2 million in total for all of this. They've produced an executive summary.
Again, that $1.2 million just to be split between all black people in California.
No, each. Yes, yeah. I think in order to qualify for the full amount, you need to tick all the boxes that they got on various kinds.
And what are these boxes? Or are we going to get into those?
We will get into that. Before we do, let's have a quick look at some of the discussions that they had. Here we are.
Reparations are not only morally justifiable, but they have the potential to address long-standing racial disparities and inequality.
The equivocal number from the 1860s for 40 acres today is $200 million for each and every African American.
California Democrats applauding the move that takes them one step closer to giving more than $1 million to each black resident, despite activists saying it's still not enough.
So how did I know? I could presage that answer at the end, because I was about to say, so as soon as they've got all of this money, I'm sure racism is fixed. They'll never ask for any money ever again. We can put all of this behind us. Finally, all the races in California can hold one another hand in hand and walk into a beautiful colourblind society.
My understanding is that would be the case at 200 million. But as you heard,
are we sure it wasn't 400 million?
Well,
200 seems a bit stingy.
Not everybody
to me.
Is happy with the 1.2 million. Some do think it should be higher, and I think that comes.
Well, you know, if I had someone just offering me 1.2 million, I'd be like, oh, come on, mate. Come on, you're being a bit stingy.
Yes, go on, pony up. I think what that comes from is during the Civil War, one of the northern generals, my understanding is a bit hazy, but one of the northern generals basically said, you know, come and fight for us and we give you 200 acres or whatever, 40 acres and a mule.
I think that was the classic, yeah.
Yeah, and this is a sort of, you know, a politician or a general basically making promises that he can't possibly keep. But that gentleman has remembered it and said, you know, 40 acres in today's money in California would be equivalent to 200 million. So, you know, make good on that.
This is all very, you know, reasonable, very reasonable indeed. But if I remember correctly, the Rodney King riots, for instance, in LA, in California, in the early 1990s, they cost the state quite a lot.
Oh, well, the state doesn't have any money. So
okay.
The state is about 1.2 trillion
I thought they had
$300
billion a year.
No, that's what they spend.
Oh, okay.
But that's
not what they make.
No, sorry, that is not what they spend. That is how much they collect. They spend another 20 billion on top of that. So they're running this big deficit, and on top of that, they've got these big pension liabilities, which is about 1.2 trillion, which they have no prospect.
Do you remember how much the George Floyd riots cost the US all in all?
I can't remember. I mean, they were.
What on earth is going on?
Set is collapsing. But I mean, they were fiery, but mostly peaceful.
St. Floyd tried to strike me down.
Should we get into the detail of this one? Let's have a look at this article from The Hill. We got that one. Yep, there we go. So if you want to get into the detail, The Hill have broken down what's behind it. So they explain that Gavin Newsom in October of 2020 signed Bill AB 3121, which created the nation's first ever task force to study and recommend reparations for slavery. And they've now reported.
So their initial task was not to discover whether reparations are required, but to find out how much to recommend.
Well,
this seems somewhat tilted.
I assume that they went into it with the assumption that there were. I mean,
oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, they produced a very large report.
Glad to know this is a nice. I mean, judging by this and the committee that we showed earlier, it's nice to know there's no bias in all of this. Purely scientific.
Certainly not. No. The article goes on to explain the task force is headed by 9 members, 5 appointed by the governor, 2 appointed by the blah 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 Senate. A majority of the task force members are black, but I'm sure that had no bearing on their conclusions in any way.
Intraracial preferences or anything like that. They don't exist. We live in the glorious Martin Luther King future.
This task force was established at a time, the article reports, when the country was still grappling with the murder of George Floyd, who had been killed by a Minneapolis police officer in May of that year. Now,
very far away from California.
I seem to remember, I watched the trial of that one. I don't think he was actually... George Floyd was actually murdered by the police officer.
I know that they definitely convicted...
Yes.
Derek Chauvin.
Oh no, he was convicted of it.
But the evidence didn't seem to.
I watched the evidence, and it actually became clear when they showed the other camera angles that he wasn't kneeling on his neck, and that he died of a fentanyl overdose, and that came out in the coroner's report.
Well,
but I can only presume that the jurors just didn't want their house burnt
I'm sure
down
it was
at 4 a.m.
I'm sure it was a white man that provided the fentanyl.
Quite possibly, yes. I'm sure they.
I don't think it was.
No, I don't know.
I don't think it was.
But I just don't think the jury wanted to get their kids burnt alive at 4 a.m. So
I mean, that's a reasonable concern.
Yeah.
Although, if I remember, there was an actual BLM activist in the trial, in the jury.
Oh, right. That
as well.
Would have helped. The article goes on to explain that the task force announced in March 2022 that any descendants of enslaved African Americans living in the United States prior to the end of the 19th century would be eligible for reparations. So that means that 2.5 million Californians, about 6.5% of Californians are black, according to the latest data from the Census Bureau, and many of those are going to meet most of the requirements in order to get the cash. So, how much is being recommended? The proposal lists specific areas for reparations. Mass incarceration. Unfortunately, black people are quite unfairly incarcerated more, so that is one area that the report recommends that they should receive reparations. Discrimination in housing.
So if you've been to prison, then you're entitled to the reparations. Is that it? This seems like it's setting up perverse incentives. I
don't think it's even necessary to have been to prison. I think it's just because if you are part of a group that is jailed more, then that qualifies you for reparations.
Carry on.
Yes, they have an internal logic, I'm sure. The other aspects that they cite is unequal access to high-quality housing and healthcare and environmental injustices. So
socioeconomic factors.
Yes. All of this adds up. So the incarceration one is apparently the committee has decided providing $115,000, $260 for each year residency in the state after 1971, which was the first year of the war on drugs, in order to make up for the fact that they were part of a group that experienced higher incarceration.
As a result of the war on drugs?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because they explain that black men make up 13% of the population of the state, but 35% of those incarcerated. So therefore, reparations are needed.
Okay, so just because there is a disparity, we assume we fill in that nice big gap with racism.
What other cause could it be apart from racism? Well, if there is one, they didn't mention it in the report, and I'm just going by the report. So what can you judge it on? Also, they point out that black women make up 13% of the female population of the state, but are 44% of incarcerated women. So
I didn't know that figure, to be fair.
Yeah, so clearly is something going off. They also cite housing policy that is also discriminatory. Let
me guess, redlining.
Yes. Actually, that was
that
one
thing that stopped 60 years ago.
That was one of the two big factors. The other factor they point out, which is a live issue today, is that the same home in a predominantly black neighbourhood as an equivalent home in a white neighbourhood tends to go for $48,000 less than the one in the white neighbourhood. So that is obviously discrimination. So if you are California and looking to buy a house in the next few weeks, make sure you offer $48,000 more than you would have done if you're buying it in a predominantly black neighbourhood, because otherwise that would be discrimination. And for that, they are proposing that you get $148,000 to make up for that one. Also, environmental.
So wait, did they just take the $48,000 and just add an extra 100 on?
Pretty much.
Okay, all right.
I'm sure there was more of a process.
This makes plenty of sense.
There was a 500-page report, and I must say I didn't read it all. I did try to read the executive summary, but I don't think they quite understood what an executive summary was supposed to be.
How could you bother to read 500 pages? I've tried to read long pages of long reports like that, and most of it is 490 pages of fluff, and you could condense it all down into about 10 pages.
Well, even the executive summary was 104 pages, and executive summary is supposed to be like 2 pages, and it looked like make work for academics to me. But
I would never hear of such a thing.
Yes, no, I'm sure they were the right people for the job to take a serious look at this. So yes, so the other thing is that there needs to be reparations for the fact that black Californians apparently have a lower average lifespan.
Just that those racism particles floating in the air targeting majority black neighborhoods.
Yes. The other one they cite is that apparently there was lower access to nutritious food because the food vendors in predominantly black areas tend to sell less nutritious food. So reparations are also necessary for that. Again,
carry on. Makes perfect sense to me.
That's obviously down to
If any of our viewers are making any connections with any of this, I just want you to know, shame on you.
Well, no. This is what the report says. I mean, this is all straight down the line.
Those dots that you're putting together right now, absolutely shame on you.
Yes. Now this isn't going to be paid out quite yet, because even though this was officially sanctioned by the the justice guy, the top justice guy in California, and this report was sanctioned, and there was a bill signed to say they had to go and do it, and this is now the official recommendation. It does still need to go through the legislative and be signed by Gavin Newsom. But I kind of feel they made a bit of a rod for their own back, because it is basically a one-party state. So now that you produce this report and you put a number to it, I'm not quite sure how you walk it back at this point, because the normal thing is that you blame Republicans.
I guess they don't.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but
I guess Gavin Newsom does just pay them out of his own pocket, I hope.
But how is he? How is he going to do that? They haven't got the money.
May I suggest borrowing it? That's never helped any. That's never caused any problems.
Yeah, but we're looking at 800 billion. 800 billion to do this, and the report does add. Where is it? Okay. This is a very cautious initial assessment of what it will cost at a minimum.
At a minimum?
Yes. So they're saying a minimum of 800 billion. Still, the panel recommends instead paying out a lump sum to eligible residents. The state begins with a down payment of a meaningful amount of funds as a first step. So pay them something and then worry about where you're going to get the rest of the money from later.
Okay.
Seems like a good policy. And actually, I think it's quite sound. But, why stop there? Seriously, why stop there? Because, lots of whites were slaves in the US as well. It never gets
they
talked.
weren't.
No,
they weren't. Lies. Lies. White supremacy. Lies.
Harry, I direct your attention to this book. This is White Cargo by Don Jordan and Michael Walsh. And they tell the story of and I'm reading from the blurb here, in the 17th and 18th century, more than 300,000 white people were shipped to America as slaves. Urchins swept up from London streets to labour in tobacco fields where life expectancy was no more than 2 years. Brothels were raided to provide breeders for Virginia. Hopeful migrants were duped into signing indentured servants. Unaware that they would become personal property and they could be bought and sold, even gambled away, transported convicts were paraded for sale like livestock. So this is the part of the story that often doesn't get talked. Before the transatlantic slave, there was actually quite a thriving slave trade of whites being sort of shipped up and sent over there. Now, some extracts from the book, which is quite interesting, because this is over sort of a 170-year period that this was taking place. Another quote from the book: some of these people were hardened criminals, but not all. Hundreds of girls sent over in the 1620s were probably child prostitutes dragged off London streets. In fact, James I ordered that 100 rowdy youths from Newmarket be shipped across to Virginia, and they were in fact just exuberant local lads whose horseplay had annoyed the king by making a bit of noise, so he just had 100 of them rounded up and sent off. Now, most shocking of all, this was a thing for quite a while. Kids from London streets would basically just be rounded up and put on boats and shipped over. And it wasn't just the British as well. Loads of Irish went over as indentured servants. Now, indentured servitude is slightly different to slavery. And in theory, it's better because eventually you can buy your way out at the end of your term. Unfortunately, in reality, it didn't tend to make an awful lot of difference because most people tended to die before they got to the point where they could, in theory, buy their way out.
Being serious for a moment, that is something interesting that I've read about from Thomas Sowell when he was talking about the distinction between them, was that historically, if you look to the records, people were actually more incentivized to treat their slaves better because they were a longer term investment, whereas the indentured servitude, having a definitive cut-off point at which you can't use them anymore, are treated more like disposable property that you can use up as quickly as possible and throw away.
Well, that's the economics of it. And to speak in purely economic terms, very impersonal economic terms, if you have a slave, that is an asset that is yours for life, whereas an indentured servant, you've got them for whatever it is, 4 or 5 years, and beyond that you get no value from them. So your incentive is to give them the hardest, dirtiest job, to get the maximum possible out of them, and you just don't care if they don't live beyond.
So,
year 4
for instance, the Irish were lots of indentured servants, so they would be given the hard, back-breaking jobs.
Yes, very much so.
Because, well...
And the casualty rate was ridiculous for them. So, yeah, most of them never made it out of the indentured servitude period. It was not just the one racial group that experienced slavery in America, and
this isn't even to talk about the Arab slave trade either.
Well, no, it's funny you mention that because I wanted to talk about that as well. I mean that went on for, of course, many centuries beforehand. You often see those sort of paintings, don't you? Of in fact, I think we've got one here. This is an image. You get many of these images, these sort of famous old paintings of the Barbary slave traders who would head out from North Africa and they would raid the coastal villages of European towns. And they did this for many centuries. So, we see here in this image, a North African pirate who has obviously conducted a raid on a European village, snatched up whoever he could get his hands on, and is then selling them on to, the Arabs.
Yeah, and if you're going to talk about the trading of Africans as slaves, then I believe the Arabs as well had a far, far greater number of African slaves imported over a particular time period as well.
Than
the transatlantic slave trade ever experienced.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, we're not saying that the transatlantic slave trade wasn't evil and awful. Of course, it was.
Obviously, it was.
But it is a small part of the overall picture. I mean, really, what we're saying is that history is awful, and everybody suffered. And slavery happened in many places. And actually...
Although I do believe as well that if you look into the figures, modern slavery is actually... There's more people in modern slavery right as we speak right now than there was at any one particular time in history as well.
Again, affecting primarily North Africa, especially states that have been intervened in by the US. You now have sort of open slave markets on a number of cities. In
All
North
for
Africa.
democracy.
Yes. Slavery has been one of those blights that affected. In fact, interestingly, with the Barbary slave trade, just talking about that, you mentioned there were more slaves today. Another interesting thing from a historical perspective is more blacks have enslaved whites than the other way around.
Oh, really?
Because of that Barbary slave trade. Yeah, for centuries, the Barbary slaves would just go around, European coastline.
Was it Biden who tweeted out recently saying that? Muslim culture has been part of the US since the very beginning, and lots of people were pointing out...
I'm not sure if that's what he meant.
If everybody was pointing out, oh, well, you did go to war over the Barbary slave trade very early on, so it makes sense.
Yes. But no, I mean, but broadly, that is the interesting point, because slavery is something that has happened to all peoples throughout history. Every race has basically done it to every other race. The transatlantic slave trade was absolutely awful, but it was a small part of the entire picture of what's going on. The only people who stand out in all of history, I would say, would be the British, because they're the ones who decided to end it. And they, of course, spent an awful lot of blood and treasure trying to stamp it out. For many years, when we decided that enough was enough, it was British ships who went out onto the high seas who went around enforcing this and trying to stamp out the slave trade. In fact, did you remember that clip with a British royalist and Don Lemon? I'll remind you of it. I think we got.
Oh, okay. I don't believe I've seen this.
Yeah, let's have a look at this.
You have those who are asking for reparations for colonialism, and they're wondering, $100 billion, $24 billion here and there, $500 million there. Some people want to be paid back, and members of the public are wondering, why are we suffering when you have all of this vast wealth? Those are legitimate concerns.
Well, I think you're right about reparations in terms of if people want it, though, what they need to do is you always need to go back to the beginning of a supply chain. Where was the beginning of the supply chain? That was in Africa. And across the entire world, when the slavery was taking place, which was the first nation in the world that abolished slavery? The first nation in the world to abolish it. It was started by William Wilberforce, was the British. In Great Britain, they abolished slavery. 2,000 naval men died on the high seas trying to stop slavery. Why? Because the African kings were rounding up their own people. They had them on cages waiting in the beaches. No one was running into Africa to get them. And I think you're totally right. If reparations need to be paid, we need to go right back to the beginning of that supply chain and say who was rounding up their own people and having them handcuffed in cages. Absolutely. That's where they should start. And maybe, I don't know, the descendants of those families where they died in the high seas trying to stop the slavery, that those families should receive something too, I think, at the same time.
Fair points. I love that moment there where you can see Don Lemon nervously clearing his throat.
Idea what to say. So there we have it. Reparations are a good thing, and the people who should be getting them are the British.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the website, such as the Brokenomics series, this episode on the economics of margin call. Brilliant movie. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.